Although it is this big bureaucracy at times, I think there are really amazing pockets within it where there is a lot of innovative thought and a bit of, honestly, startup culture in terms of people really centering around a mission and trying to do what they can to advance mission goals. Hi, I'm Rachel Desch. I'm a member of the 2023 cohort and a second-year student in the Master's in International Policy program. I imagine a world where trusted institutions and leaders are able to mitigate violent conflict and inspire innovative policymaking.
Welcome to the Imagine a World podcast from Knight-Hennessy Scholars. We are here to give you a glimpse into the Knight-Hennessy Scholar community of graduate students, spanning all 7 Stanford schools, including business, education, engineering, humanities, law, medicine, and sustainability. In each episode, we talk with scholars about the world they imagine and what they are doing to bring it to life.
Today, we've got Rachel Desch, a second-year international policy master's student. During our conversation, you'll hear Rachel's experience growing up on the military base, choosing a career in government, organizing trips to Coachella, and so much more. Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome to another episode of the Imagine a World podcast. I am your host for today, Willie Thompson. I'm a member of the 2022 cohort of Knight-Hennessy Scholars. I finished an MBA at the Graduate School of Business, and now I'm doing a master's in policy, organizations, and leadership studies at the Graduate School of Education. And today I have a very special guest, as you heard at the top of the episode, Rachel Desch. Let's just get right into it. Rachel, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's crazy that it's already week 6.
Don't remind me. Okay, it's nearing the end.
Yeah, I think 2 years has flown by really quickly.
We're coming up on the end of the quarter. What are you looking forward to with regards to end of quarter? Like, what's the end of a school year like at Stanford for folks who are less initiated?
Oh, I feel like spring quarter is rough in terms of you've had 3 quarters back to back of a lot of really quick information. And I came from more of a semester system where you have a bit more time for each class. And I think I love at Stanford, you're able to really learn a lot about many different things in a short amount of time, but it means you're also really saturated with information. So now the midterms are kind of kicking up, final projects are kicking into gear. And yeah, trying to get everything into a good spot to close out.
Yeah, for sure. I am also from a school that had a semester system, and I think the quarter system was a huge adjustment for me because of how fast things move. And you blink and it's like, week 4, and then week 4 you have a midterm. Whereas at least like in a midterm system, in a semester system, I don't know if you felt this way. I felt like I could sort of like I could coast the first couple weeks and kind of just be like, okay, yeah, like sure, like there's like a thing down the road I need to finish. But it's kind of like if you coast your mind, if you mentally coast in a quarter system, you really pay for it by the time you're back on shore, right?
Yeah, I feel like I've had some classes where by week 3 you already have your first midterm, and it's like I just started learning this a few days ago.
Right. It's definitely a unique place. What you said is you're being inundated with a lot of information right now in the spring quarter. What are some of the classes that are really intellectually stimulating?
I think this quarter is interesting because I'm taking some classes that are a little more outside my normal courses. Okay. So I'm taking a class on global project finance as someone who does not have any financial background.
Okay.
And we also are in the midst of our 6-month international policy capstone. Okay. Over spring break, I was lucky enough to travel to Ghana to do some field work and just kind of really integrating into another community and getting to get really deep into a topic.
It's really unique when you have those opportunities to actually go out and do the field work and like meet people who your research and your work is affecting. Yeah. It reminds me of Courtney Burden talking about a trip she went on for designing for extreme affordability. Mm-hmm. I think she went to Costa Rica, but sort of like there's nothing sort of like bridging the classroom experience with the experiences of people on the ground that really, I think, solidifies the learning and prompts a lot of reflection. So
Yeah, I think that's something I love about Stanford is the amount of project-based classes we have here.
Yeah.
And generally, I think just like the design school ethos that is starting to permeate across the university of human-centered design and being really intentional with how you engage with communities and build solutions that actually are addressing what the limitations are versus kind of imposing ideas.
Absolutely. Well, I know we're going to get into a lot of this. I just wanted to know what your spring quarter was like in terms of a course load, because, I feel like spring quarter, you blink and you're at the end of the quarter, because I think it's because we have there's no break in this quarter. Like with fall quarter, you have like Thanksgiving, and then spring break between the two quarters in the winter and spring. But once you get back, it's all gas, no brakes.
It is.
We're going to get this started as we get all episodes started off, which is getting to know a little bit more about you. So you have an Imagine World statement there, a lot of different ways I want to take it, especially considering the world we're in right now. But I will save that for now. And before we talk about the world you imagine, I want to talk about the world you're born into and the world you've experienced thus far. Where are you from, and what was your journey here to Stanford?
I grew up in Fayetteville, North Carolina, which is a multicultural community in terms of it's home to one of the largest military bases in the world.
Fort Bragg.
Yep. Fort Liberty, now Fort Bragg again. So,
noted.
Yes. My dad was in the military, and so I kind of grew up with that background of seeing a family member in military service. And my mom is Polish, so I also grew up in a multicultural household in terms of most of my maternal family still lives in Europe, in Poland and Germany, and my dad's family are here in the U.S. I think in Fayetteville, in addition to just having this really large military base, the town really revolved around that community in terms of like the military was the largest employer, followed by the health system and the public education system. So in some ways, looking back and reflecting, I think public service has been the main careers that I saw when I was being raised, and something that kind of drove my desire to keep working in that space. Growing up, I also didn't live extremely close to any other of my family members. And I think as folks in the military community test to, your coworkers, your neighbors, your friends really become that family for you. And so I think that really gave me a lot of appreciation for how to build community and create these relationships that really will support you in times of need. Growing up, for example, I was a child of 9/11 in terms of it was a big impact in my life. More so, I think, also because coming from a military community, we already had our parents were deployed overseas quite a bit. And then from 2001 onward, I think in every class I had growing up, there was at least one person whose parent was deployed, people who maybe didn't see their family members for months to years at a time. And I thought that was quite normal. And so when I went to UNC in college, I think it was really stepping outside of that military bubble and realizing that that's really not the norm, but really appreciating, I think, the value that growing up in such a community provided.
Yep. One question for you about that before because I feel us going into getting into UNC, which I know we'll talk about, and then probably Stanford as well. What effect did that dynamic have on you in terms of your upbringing? Sort of like the notion of like a parent being away for a period of time, and you mentioned it was like quite normalized, but I'm wondering to what degree you've sort of reflected on that and considered sort of how that shaped you and your upbringing.
In a bigger picture, it made international relations seem really close to me in terms of sometimes you can feel like what's happening across the world doesn't really impact you. And in some way, we were all really attuned to what was happening outside of the U.S. because it would determine like our own interactions with our community and kind of expectations. In some ways, it also normalized having more international experiences in terms of, even though I never moved around and was based in Fayetteville,
right,
a lot of my friends would come for 2 years and leave, or those of us who grew up in Fayetteville, I think we're just very used you become quite adaptable and flexible in ways that you don't necessarily realize, again, is not the norm.
Yep.
But I think from an early age really helped me maintain relationships with people I care about, even if they're not physically co-located, which as an adult, I think I'm much more comfortable living away from my core community.
That is really interesting about the connection between like your local community and international affairs, because this might be contentious, but I know geographically North Carolina is considered the South, but like I don't consider it part of the deep South, which I have friends who also went to UNC or from North Carolina, and they debate me on this, but I do feel like for at least, my upbringing and everything, like connection to like the rest of the world wasn't really like something that was talked about a ton. And I do feel like being military base, there are certain sort of like occupations that predisposition you to these events in ways that sort of like not being connected to them does. And unless something shocking happens, like I had a high school classmate whose brother was killed in Afghanistan, and I remember, it was sad. I remember them like driving his casket like past the high school, and like everybody like went outside to like see it. And it's not until like sort of like you see something happen on the news, and then like something happens to someone in that community, and that's when like these things tend to come together. But what I'm hearing from you is that like it was like sort of like a steady stream of like connection to what was going on outside the U.S. because of that dynamic, which is interesting. Yeah, it's like a totally interesting way to grow up. So talk to me about the transition from high school to college. Was UNC the only option? Like, I'm just fascinated by this because I had a very I had a very atypical college application situation, which I would not advise anyone to do. But I'm wondering, how did you approach college, applying, landing on UNC, and how that got you to Stanford eventually?
I'm telling this story like it's very clear cut, but I actually only applied to 4 universities, in part.
I feel so seen. Thank you.
Yeah, my parents were like, you're only going to one. Why apply to so many? So I applied to 2 schools in North Carolina and 2 in D.C. Because, again, I did feel kind of inclined to do something in the more policy world. But within North Carolina, I was actually deciding between doing an engineering degree at NC State or international relations at UNC. And so
Duke wasn't an option? Like,
I am a Carolina girl, Tar Heels all the way. No, Duke is beautiful, but quite expensive. So was definitely leaning towards more public universities.
For sure.
But when I was in high school, I actually went to a high school that had an engineering academy that I was enrolled in, the Integrated Systems Technology Academy. And so through that, you essentially take what would equate to, I believe, like the first semester to maybe the first year of like engineering classes you would take at college.
Oh, cool. Like a dual enrollment kind of thing.
No, but yes.
Okay.
And that you're taking a lot of these classes, but they're not actually taught at the college level, so you're not getting accreditation.
I see.
But you come in knowing a lot. And so I really was considering a degree in civil engineering. I really loved the engineering courses I took in terms of you were just constantly giving problems and told to kind of innovate solutions. But in the end, I decided that I would probably want to pursue more of in an international policy role, and so decided to go to UNC and magically got a job with a poli-sci degree.
So you mentioned doing a lot of engineering work, civil engineering. And by the way, for a layperson, like what's the difference between the types of engineering? Like I'm not like, sometimes I forget the difference between like civil engineers and industrial engineers and the mechies and the chemies. Like what are civil engineers, what are they preoccupied with? Like what are they concerned with?
So it's been a while. But I think civil engineering was more of like architecture, building, bridges, like stationary objects. Versus mechanical is more things in motion. And like engines and things like that.
And then what led you to switch from engineering, which you said, you really enjoyed, to something like political science?
Yeah, in part, I really did not like physics, and so I figured that would probably be a bit of a disqualifier. I was not great at physics, I should say. And I think in the back of my mind, in part, again, growing up in this really diverse community, I wanted to think a little bit more about what are the forces that shape international policy? Like, who determines the trajectory of world politics and conflict? And these were questions that I think were really sitting on me and that I would probably not have answered going into engineering.
And this came as a result of like the reflection you were doing based on like your upbringing, I'm wondering, like, when did you start to feel there was like a shift in the things that you were interested in, that you cared about?
Yeah, I think throughout high school, I kind of had one foot in engineering and one foot in the humanities.
Okay, yeah. We love
the story of my life is I hedge a lot with a lot of curiosity.
Nothing wrong with hedging.
I think in an ideal world, I would have done a dual degree with both.
Okay.
But I'm happy with the choice I made, but really have a lot of respect for the engineers out there, especially those really good at physics.
And then talk to me about your experience majoring in political science at UNC and how that led you to want to come to a place like Stanford.
Yeah. So at UNC, we didn't actually have a traditional international relations degree.
Okay.
So my degree title is Peace, War, and Defense and Economics. So I double majored. When I was looking at courses, I really wanted to take courses across different disciplines. And so the Peace, War, and Defense major, which we called PWAD, unfortunately, is offered a lot of flexibility in terms of what region I could look at, what topics I could take, a mixture of theory as well as regional studies. And so pursued that. And it was, though, more theory-based, and so halfway through my undergrad, I decided to add on an economics degree, and I, to this day, still have a love-hate relationship with economics.
Ooh, tell me more. Tell me more.
I think it's so important in terms of understanding, like, economic development and in terms of providing, like, what at a macroeconomic level do states or governments need to think through or provide to kind of elevate everyone to better financial means. Mm-hmm. But it is also a lot of theory, and sometimes I struggle with putting it into practice. Even now I'm in a course that is heavy on econometrics, and I feel like I'm really relearning a lot. Yeah, so I double majored in PWAD and econ. And then throughout college, I was trying to take different internship opportunities. Yeah. So one formative moment was I did an internship with the U.S. State Department at the embassy in Riga, Latvia. Okay. And that was a really eye-opening experience in terms of being able to work in an embassy and actually see what a career in international relations could look like on a day-to-day and what policymaking and diplomacy looks like. Right. I also, throughout college, and actually since high school, worked in retail, which is very humbling.
Say more.
As you know, it's very people-oriented. You're selling, you're engaging with people, grumpy people, happy people. Like you see a lot of humanity in retail.
For sure.
As on the side of having the professional internships was also juggling, working a few part-time jobs on the side while in school, and kept me quite busy. So working at the Department of State, and then at what point are you thinking about graduate school? I wasn't thinking about graduate school at all. Okay. So in part, I did not really grow up with anyone having a master's degree or PhD. Same. Yeah. And so to me, I didn't really think about it in terms of not having it as like an option that was visible for me. Yeah. But also, I think I wanted to get into the workforce. I was kind of itching to put what I was learning into practice. So I truly did not consider look at any graduate schools. After UNC, I was lucky enough to get a job working in government right out of undergrad. Yeah. And it was about 5 years into working that I realized I did want to go back to grad school and take some time to, again, sit back and think through some of these hard problems I was encountering.
What was triggering that for you in terms of the 5-year mark and grad school as an option?
Yeah, I think I had been working on foreign policy analysis, and my job was to analyze what was happening on the ground, or essentially like current events, like a newspaper almost. It stopped short of actually advising policy. That was something that was done only by policymakers. As I was kind of hitting maybe that 5-year mark, I was realizing I maybe wanted to do more in the policymaking space. And I didn't feel that I had the tools that would position me to do that well. And so I was looking to come back to school to do some research on international development and conflict resolution, and kind of step back and be able to do that research in a space where you could make mistakes and it wouldn't have that much of an impact. Or I shouldn't say make mistakes and not have an impact, but I wanted to think about hard issues in a low stakes environment.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah. And I think that academia and the university is a really good place for that, because the opportunity just to debate and sort of go into depth around the pros, cons, why not for any natural or for anything that happens in the world. So I definitely think university makes sense. So I have 2 questions that I'm going to try to meld into one, because it's really cool to hear about other people's work and disciplines. So you mentioned wanting to go to grad school to get specific tools that would help you become a more effective policymaker. And you mentioned foreign policy analysis, which I think I know what that means, but I would love to get more of your take on what a good foreign policy analysis looks like. And so I'm wondering, how would you do policy analysis differently now, having gone to grad school, than you would have done it before?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a few different things to unpack there. Analysis can vary depending on what department or agency you're in and what institution. And there's definitely areas where it is more quantitative, evaluating metrics and trying to make predictions of a specific policy that your department or agency is trying to implement. Yep. And my work was more just researching what was happening and providing essentially like the background segment to the policymaker.
Got you.
And so in part, why I did want to come back to grad school is I spent a lot of time working in that space of what is currently happening, what are the developments, really building a strong foundation of understanding how to look at issues strategically. Yeah. But I didn't have much experience or work in developing the actual policies that would address those issues. And so I wanted to be able to come to Stanford or grad school generally and really think through and look back at what policies have worked in the past in terms of specifically like conflict resolution, and get an understanding of how we could create similar institutions or institutions that fit each specific instance best.
Yeah. You're trying to find a solution that fits the context.
Yes.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
And in part, so I did spend about 5 years working in that more analytic space or background analysis space. Yep. And in part, because I was looking to get more involved in policymaking, I did a rotation to the White House and worked at the National Security Council in legislative affairs. And through there, I was really able to broaden my scope to understand the whole of what the U.S. government is doing in foreign policy and how policy is made not just within the executive branch, but also Congress, and how it really takes multiple institutions to drive change. And again, more on the qualitative side, understanding how funding is actually given and how you allocate limited resources and what those conversations look like.
Awesome. Now, I was going to say, if anyone took a look at your LinkedIn, they would know that you worked in the federal government for almost a decade. I was doing the math, just counting up the years and months, which includes multiple administrations. I'm thinking about you, Joe Nails, but someone else who talked a lot about public service. I'll ask 2 questions, but we can come back to the second one, or I can remind you of it like after we talk about the first one. But, why did you choose government as a pathway for your career? And since you'll be, I assume, returning after school, what does it mean to work in government given all this transpired since you've been a graduate student?
So choosing government as a pathway, I think, reflecting back, was probably driven a lot by seeing that as the major employer growing up.
Yeah.
And I knew I probably didn't want to enter military service, and so was exploring what other roles in government would look like.
Okay.
I think you can have enormous impact working in government, and I really wanted to be a part of the team and the system that shapes that, and having a seat at the table to try to make the best policies possible. Despite growing up surrounded by the military, I think to some extent there also weren't a lot of examples for me of people who went on to government careers outside of a military entity. Honestly, growing up, like moving to DC and working there seemed like a dream versus something that was necessarily attainable. I really wanted to break through that ceiling or the limitation I was kind of putting on myself. I think government should look like the people it represents in terms of ensuring a diversity of experiences. And it can feel like when you're small town girl in North Carolina that the federal government can feel quite distant.
Okay.
And I wanted to close that distance and really understand more of how to get things done.
I love your take on like how much you feel like working in government has changed in terms of the meaning people get from it or the value of working in government over the past, let's say, like 4 to 6 years.
I think one thing that's interesting, to me at least, is that there are very few political appointees in government. And I think when you look at the news, that's what you tend to see. And it's what we keep track of because political appointees are in quite senior positions.
Yep.
But I was researching this right before I came in. I think there's about 4,000 political appointees in the government, and there's over 1 million people who work in federal agencies.
Oh, wow.
So the bulk of the federal government is made of normal, ordinary people, as are political appointees. But
it's like less than half a percent, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I think for public service, to make a generalization, I think a lot of people join it because they want to give back to their community or their country. And so there is this sense of service, improving the lives of others. As federal government employees, especially at least working in some of the departments and agencies I was in DC, you make a pledge to the Constitution and to the service of the country. And so I think I have worked across administrations and administrations across both parties, and there were policies I agreed and disagreed with across both of those, or all three. And I think what keeps me going is that there's so much work that happens outside of the major news networks, and there's a lot of really incredible work that's happening behind the scenes. And I want to continue to be a part of that and ensuring that we are a constantly improving government and nation and having a seat at that table.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe this is a good segue into your Imagine a World statement because there's a lot there that I want to get to. So there are 3 specific things that I want to get your thoughts on, and I'll just go in order. You mentioned trust in institutions and leaders, being able to mitigate violence, violent conflict, and inspire innovative policymaking. So just taking that bit by bit, what does it take for people to build or increase their trust in institutions and leaders?
Yeah, I think in part, some of it is transparency from the institutions in government or leadership of just what is happening and how policies are negotiating. I think it involves a lot of community engagement, maybe more so than we currently see across both international institutions as well as domestic. And that it has, to me, there has to be a conversation between those who are holding roles of power and decision-making and those that they are representing. I think if you look at a lot of polls, there is an increasing distrust in government. In part, I think it's because it seems like so inaccessible and that people's representatives are not necessarily representing what each constituent thinks they need. And I, especially I think through Stanford, am really leaning into community and stakeholder engagement and really ensuring that institutions are established in a way that is functional and effective, but also represent the needs and goals of the communities they are there to either govern or support or represent.
Got it. And when you think about violent conflict, like what about the issue of violent conflict made you like situate that in the center of your Imagine a World statement?
Yeah, I think a lot of my life and research has been focused on areas of conflict. So again, growing up, I was always aware of the wars and conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq throughout the world. And then I think in part also at UNC, some of the research I did was on insurgencies in Latin America and political movements in Eastern Europe. So quite different, but in both cases. And I think what I've been drawn to is trying to understand how you can alleviate violence or mitigate violence to come to better negotiated agreements in terms of, I focus on violent conflict in part because it has such an impact on the lives of people who are not actively involved in the conflict as well. I think an alternative to my Imagine a World is I imagine a world with no war, but that's quite idealistic, but something I think I would still hope to attain one day. So a lot of my work has been researching areas of conflict, drivers of conflict, and trying to understand how to either end those, lessen, or come to negotiated agreements, which is something I've spent more time here researching at Stanford, like transitional justice and different historic mechanisms and academic debates about what that looks like now. Something that I think has helped me and that I do think is really helpful for people who go into any sort of policy making is to really have an understanding of the issue they are trying to solve have an understanding of the issue space. I'm interested in mitigating violent conflict through means other than more violence, in terms of taking a holistic approach to what you need, whether that's economic development, good governance structures, which is a convoluted topic in itself, or other issues. I think in order to mitigate conflict or even come to negotiated agreements, or whether to mitigate conflict from occurring or negotiating conflict resolution, I strongly believe that you have to take a holistic approach. And I think oftentimes we focus more on the immediate military action versus necessarily addressing the underlying root causes of why these circumstances occur.
For sure. And based on our conversation earlier, I can tell that you are building like I was thinking when you said, economic development as an alternative as opposed to more violence, I could see maybe how that global finance, that global finance class, a project management class could come into play there in terms of how you fund those kind of things or how you think about sourcing them.
Exactly. I think something I didn't expect to love as much as I have at Stanford is classes on building infrastructure.
Well, maybe it touches back to your civil engineering,
Yes,
physical infrastructure, metaphysical.
I'll still find a way to integrate it.
For sure. And then the last thing you mentioned was how the relationship between trusted institutions and leaders, mitigating violence, and then inspiring innovative policymaking. So, like when you think about innovative policymaking, inspiring that, like what does that entail? Like, is there an example that comes to mind of what the world could use more of?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I actually wanted to come to Stanford versus staying in what I call the DC bubble. Is that I do think there's a lot we can learn from the startup culture, the entrepreneurial culture here in Silicon Valley, in terms of being willing to take more risks. And I think that is something that there's a conversation about right now in terms of are the amount of regulations we have for example, infrastructure projects limiting the amount of innovation we're able to bring. And I think that applies across sectors, even in more conflict resolution mechanisms in terms of, I think sometimes we can default to what's been done in the past, and sometimes that does work, and there are best practices for a reason. But I think if we want to create a better world and address some of these complex problems we're dealing with, we're going to need to think of more innovative ways to do that. And one thing that I think does happen in government is that it is so bureaucratic, and you can really end up relying on standard operating procedures and things that have been done in the past. And I think we should try to create a culture of innovation and more risk-taking than I think we currently have. I think also with innovative policymaking, it requires imagining a world, honestly, like imagining a new world and thinking of the end state you want rather than necessarily starting with what you currently have and trying to maneuver that. And I think sometimes some of the most innovative ideas are things that are really out of the box and focusing on the outcome you want. I think there's value in ideating what different systems can look like and how we can adapt our current government structures or even just general policies and regulations to encourage a more innovative world.
Okay, so my last two questions are about the government, and one is about perception. What do people get wrong in their perceptions of government and government work, and then what do they get right?
Although it is this big bureaucracy at times, I think there are really amazing pockets within it where there is a lot of innovative thought and a bit of, honestly, startup culture in terms of people really centering around mission and people doing what they can to advance mission goals. I think government, what people may not realize is that not just in the military world, but across government and the broader bureaucracy, there is a lot of mission-driven work in terms of people tend to work on things that they care really deeply about and are really keen to improve the projects that they're working on.
Yeah, for sure. And then that's in the realm of what people get wrong, right?
Yeah.
And now where are they right in their perceptions of government?
I think what people can get right is that it is a big bureaucracy and that it has a language of its own. Okay. So I think just like the private sector has its own language and the medical field, you have to know how to navigate the systems in order to really be an effective agent of change. And in some ways, I think that is challenging and that I think government should be more accessible to people and easier to navigate.
But the bureaucracy is still there. Understood. We talked about you working as, advising in policy, wanting to go into policy making. Policy making, in my mind, tends to lean towards an elected position of sorts. So I'm just going to ask right here for an Imaginal World exclusive, are there any thoughts you have about running for public office someday?
Yeah, I think it is something that I hadn't necessarily considered before coming to Stanford.
Oh, okay.
But it's something I've been thinking about more now.
How's your time here at Stanford enabled that, that idea of public office and running for it?
Yeah, I think something I joke with my friends is that Stanford kind of gives you the audacity in terms of, and circling back to innovation, it's a culture of not like no but a yes and. And I think a very solution-oriented culture. And that's something where I've realized, not only do I want to potentially be informing policy, I think I would love the chance to actually work more directly on it and not just have a seat at the table, but be at the head of the table. And I think also being at Stanford and outside of my DC bubble has made me realize how much knowing the language of government can be really helpful in ensuring that resources that are maybe made available at the federal level are also accessible to the local communities that could benefit from them most. And so I think coming to Stanford, there's been such a literal and figurative wealth of opportunity and so much funding and just a culture of trying to be agents of change in different disciplines. And that's something that I think I've increasingly wanted to find a way to contribute back to Fayetteville, whether that is as an elected official or through just more community engagement.
Yep.
I think there's a lot of value in helping people understand what resources are there and making things more accessible.
Absolutely. There's a number of perspectives I've encountered around how unattainable it can feel to run for public office, depending on like what level you're doing it at. And so I think definitely trying to find ways to make it feel more accessible or definitely noteworthy. And I'll leave it there. I'm gonna transition now from all the government talk, and I want to get into some closing thoughts here. One is any advice you would have for other people applying to Stanford and KH, and we need to get into some improbable facts, because I want to learn. I want to know about the black belt taekwondo. I want to learn about, maybe the Michelin-esque food blog you got, or maybe even this trip to Coachella that you took with Santiago and Chan. But we'll get to that in a second. But what advice do you have before we get to the fun stuff?
Yeah, I think I almost didn't apply to KH in Stanford. I almost counted myself out before even applying. And that's
so crazy to me. Well, it's crazy to know you and see you do your thing. Oh wow, you almost chose not to do it. Yeah.
I went to a KH info session when they were in DC and realized it was the last year I could apply because I had been out of school for a bit. And also, one of the students who was actually speaking there made a comment of, don't count yourself out. You should apply. No one thinks they're going to get. No one walks in and says, I'm going to get KH.
Who is this magical student who gave you that boost of confidence?
I really wish I had jotted down their name. To this day, I was like, this person truly inspired me to just submit the application because, the worst that can happen is at some point you get a no, but that's what's happening if you're not applying anyway.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And I think being your authentic self, in the KH application, you do a lot of soul searching.
Yeah, for sure.
And
which is valuable in and of itself.
It is. Yeah. It's due so early that you really can use it as a base for other applications as well. But I think just be really genuine and true to who you are. Because I also was so on the fence about applying, I was working on it closer to the deadline, which I think also helped me not overthink what I was putting in and really come to it with my true and whole self.
Beautiful. Now, let's talk about some improbable facts. And at least if you don't cover the Coachella trip and the improbable facts, I want to hear something about it. But yeah, as people know, improbable facts is an inevitable part of the KH application experience. So could you share an improbable fact?
Let me pull them up. I actually took a screenshot.
Yeah, I was telling people recently that I actually did that exercise. And I was like, I'm never doing this again. It was so hard to think of my improbable facts. I'm like, I'm not thinking about this actively again unless I need to.
Yeah, I think the improbable facts are actually maybe where I spent the most time on my application.
For sure.
In part, trying to understand what an improbable fact would be.
Right.
What do you consider improbable for someone who doesn't know you?
Right.
And trying to highlight that. So, yeah, I think I've just pulled up my improbable facts.
Okay.
And one, which ties into our conversation, was that while I did not pursue a degree in STEM, I attended a NASA space camp and worked on a project for a mission to Mars when I was in high school.
Did the mission to Mars actually happen?
No.
Oh, okay.
But it was really exciting.
Oh, very cool.
I also never played soccer as a child,
but
I was captain of an adult soccer team, an adult recreational soccer team.
Still adults. Yeah.
In DC, which honestly brought me a lot of joy and a lot of great friends. Somewhat hinted at this, but I also don't know the criteria for a Michelin star, but I did run an amateur food blog on Instagram.
Okay. But you're no longer running it, I'm assuming.
It is still active, but I am perhaps not as active on it as I was.
Makes sense. You're a graduate student in a very rigorous program.
But I did it. I started it actually in DC when I had first moved there in terms of I'm a very goal-oriented person.
Okay.
And so I was kind of setting a goal for myself to try new foods and really get out there and explore. And so as I was trying to discover the DC food scene, I was like, I bet other people might also enjoy this. And so I really did no promotion of the blog, but it started to naturally gain some followers, which was really exciting. I also was aiming to get some free food out of it as a recent college grad in a big city.
And did that work?
Unfortunately not, but I did get to do some pastry making classes, which were really exciting based on the blog. So really fun times.
Very cool. And just a quick aside, just humor me a bit. What's the food scene like in a place like Palo Alto? Like, what is it? And you can be honest,
Yeah. My first thought as an active grad student is it's pricey. But it's good. I think for folks listening, a lot of times Stanford will cater food.
Yes,
and so
true.
there are some staples of your Palo Alto diet, which include Zareens, which is great Indian, Pakistani mix. Oren's hummus, great Mediterranean food. One that's on my bucket list that I will maybe eat when I'm back for an alumni reunion is Nobu Sushi.
Oh, yeah, the Nobu restaurant. Yeah.
There's a good mix of food here, but sometimes out of reach of the student budget.
For sure. All right, and then I'll just get off on my salt and straw agenda here.
Love it.
You love salt and straw.
I love salt and straw.
Okay. I think this is where we have a departure in our friendship.
No.
What do you love about salt and straw?
I will say when I go to Salt and Straw, which is a local ice cream shop here. Creamery.
Yeah.
I do stick with more traditional flavors.
Okay.
So they're known for more off the wall creations.
Okay.
And I'm a chocolate girl.
We go eat chocolate brownie is delicious.
I will do the chocolate brownie time and time again. Okay. So I have to say, as a non-adventurous ice cream eater, it's amazing.
Okay. We made that caveat. Now we agree. Yeah. I'm not on a mission to like discredit salt and straw per se, but it is like, I always do the argument that they always go one ingredient like over on the ice cream flavor. It's always one ingredient over. Like recently I went and they're doing their monthly series is on they're releasing a cookbook. Which is interesting because I never thought of like cookbook for ice cream because I'm thinking cooking and heat, whatever. And I remember like going through the list of options, and I remember it was like there was like a vanilla custard with butterscotch swirls. So anyway, sorry, we're gonna do a quick ice cream aside because I know you're a foodie. I always feel subconscious about how many samples I can ask for at Salt and Straw because they're like. And by the way, whoever trains the people at Salt and Straw about that, they're super nice about it. They are never like, okay, it's the last one or whatever. Because you probably go in there and be like, I want to try 8 flavors, and they let you try 8 flavors. But anyway, I always feel conscious about that, especially when the line is long.
And the line is always long.
Most of the times, yeah. And so they had like a vanilla custard with butterscotch. But I was like, I already had 3 or 4 flavors in mind. So I couldn't be like, I'm going to try to go for the 4th or 5th. But it was like strawberries, tres leches, which is like fine.
Yeah.
A matcha man ice cream that was like matcha with like tangerine. And then there was I'm trying to think what the other one was. I didn't get the other one. But then I tried, it was I think it was a chocolate chili crisp peanut butter cup ice cream. And I was like, yo, this sounds really good. And I remember like trying it and being like, oh, like, okay. Like, because I was worried about the chili crisp. Because the chili crisp was like, why does that need to be an ice cream? But then I got the sample and I was like, oh, I can't really taste it. Maybe it's like sort of like maybe like a numbing thing. Like you maybe get like a little bit of heat or whatever. So then I get a scoop with the waffle cone, of course. Waffle cone's delicious.
Of course. And
then I'm eating it delicious. Because I think it was like chocolate. It was a chocolate-based ice cream with, you had peanut butter cups and a peanut butter marshmallow fluff.
Ooh.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I was like, wow, this sounds delicious. And then like 2 bites in, I get like a mouthful of chili flakes.
Oh, no.
I eat the rest of the ice cream, but I'm so upset that I bought that ice cream.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, can you just take the chili flakes out? Can we just like, can we get like you got like the vegan and the gluten-free options. Can you get like the one ingredient removed option of the ice cream, you know?
Yeah.
Because I would love to have a chocolate-based peanut butter cup, peanut butter marshmallow fluff ice cream, you know?
Yeah.
And so the parts I had that weren't the chili flakes were phenomenal.
Yeah. I wholeheartly agree with sometimes the one ingredient too far. I feel like sometimes I'll like look and I'm like, oh, that sounds really good, except for that extra item. It's a challenge. I will say also, I love a good, simple meal or like a good classic in terms of, as many of my friends can tell you, I love Waffle House, which is
Rachel Desch. You know what? If we thought we were diverging in the path on the Salt and Straw thing, we're now converging once again on Waffle House. All-Star Special?
Yes.
100%.
So good.
Oh, but man.
Yes, I will 100% stand behind Waffle House every time.
Oh,
it is
man.
an equalizer of people. It is amazing waffles. And I think, honestly, wherever I end up after Stanford, I have to be within an hour of a Waffle House.
You would go an hour? I'm not gonna lie. Not being out here, I would travel sometime. They need a Waffle House out here.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't really fit the culture of like, NorCal and, I don't know, like Crunchy or whatever, but like an All-Star Special with the hash brown smothered, covered in all that good stuff.
Diced everything.
Diced everything with the eggs. And granted, I mean, maybe it's the health concerns, because I kind of feel like if your Waffle House isn't like close to like being closed down for health concerns, like I'm not really going to the Waffle House, right? Because that's kind of the vibe, right? Sticky floor, everything, but I feel like people here are more pristine.
No, I love it. I love a good Waffle House waffle.
I haven't had Waffle House in like a long time.
I know. I think whenever I go back to North Carolina, I always try to make a Waffle House stop.
Oh man, that made my day. Well, cool. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Actually, before we go, tell me about this Coachella trip. I want to hear about this Coachella trip.
The Coachella trip, yeah.
Real quick.
It's my first time at Coachella.
Okay.
I was a little worried it'd probably be overhyped, but it was fabulous.
Okay. Are you a concert goer typically? Like, do you go to concerts?
I am a concert goer. I love live music.
Okay, all right.
As you mentioned, I went with 3 other KH scholars from my year, and we did car camping, which honestly was excellent. We had a really big tent. We had some snacks, and it was just like really great to be fully immersed in like a music vibe, a music culture.
Yeah.
You get to spend like almost 12 hours just listening to music and then come back and immediately fall asleep and do it all over again for 3 days.
And the car camping is like you pull up your car somewhere and then you like just put up a tent and you just camp out? Is that
okay? So some people were sleeping in their cars, but we did do like mildly bougie in terms of we had our tent, but then we also brought air mattresses because most of us were over 30, and
the back. My lower back was killing me last night, so I get it. Yeah,
I wanted to be able to dance and survive 3 days. So.
Absolutely.
But yeah, Coachella was amazing. I think definitely worth the cost in terms of just the production value of all the sets. I definitely associated with a lot of like the memes of girl math being like, okay, well, if I would have seen all these 6 artists separately, it would have been more than what I'm paying. So really I'm saving money by being here.
Sure, that works. And as we close, best act, most surprising act. And that could be positive or negative.
Oh, yeah. I think best act would have to be Lady Gaga. She threw a performance.
I believe it.
Someone was saying it was like Mozart's symphony for the first time in terms of she just went all out. It was like almost watching an opera, a musical.
Wow.
So it was fabulous. And most surprising, I think I really liked Benson Boone, which...
Oh, yeah, I've been hearing a lot about Benson Boone.
I think when you listen to him, it's a very chill vibe. And then seeing him live, he brought so much energy to the stage that he definitely converted me into a fan.
Okay, all right, Benson Boone fan. All right, well, Rachel, thank you so much for making the time to be part of an episode of Imagine World. You've been on the team for like forever, so it's great to have even a member of the team join and be interviewed on the pod. So thank you for everything you've done for the pod, for us, and for the community, and honestly what you're going to do for the world after you graduate and go off into the world.
Thank you for everything you do. You really built this podcast, and it's just an incredible way to learn more about people in the community and hear what passions are driving people's careers and research.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm glad I was able to share space with you, and yeah, I can't wait to keep up with all the things you're going to do after Stanford. So thanks for making the time again, and take care.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Imagine the World, where we hear from inspiring members of the KHS community who are making significant contributions in their respective fields, challenging the status quo and pushing the boundaries of what is possible as they imagine the world they want to see.
This podcast is sponsored by Knight-Hennessy Scholars at Stanford University, a multidisciplinary, multicultural graduate fellowship program providing scholars with financial support to pursue graduate studies at Stanford while helping equip them to be visionary, courageous, and collaborative leaders who address complex challenges facing the world. Follow us on social media at Knight-Hennessy and visit our website at kh.stanford.edu to learn more about the program and our community.